Today we're going to be looking at a coast exam question. Let's dive straight into it. Explain the role of sediment transport in creating distinctive landforms. As I've said many times, make sure that you highlight the key words in the question before you start answering the question. This will help you to just organize your thoughts, but also write in clear paragraphs and confidence in the exam itself. Now, one way to do that as you're revising is by breaking this question down. There are simple elements to this question which will help you to write a very good answer in itself. So make sure that you understand what sediment transport is. So there's 4 different types. You've got traction, siltation, suspension, solution. And then the landforms, which you've got quite a few to choose from. Now in this exam, you don't have to talk about every single one of them. You can pick out maybe 2, 3, maximum 4. 3 should be sufficient as long as you're explaining them in detail in context of sediment transport. And then make some notes on the role of sediment in the creation of, for example, a tombolo or a recurve spit or a cuspate foreland, for example. Now, other relevant keywords to use would be the ones that you can see on the right-hand side here: sediment cells, swash, backwash, longshore drift. Make sure that you try to integrate these into your answers as much as possible, because this will help you to show or demonstrate to the examiner that you truly understand the geographical importance of sediment in the creation of that particular landform itself. Let's have a look at the sample answer. Sediment transport is predominantly through longshore drift. This is the net lateral movement of sediment along a beach due to waves moving up the beach at an angle. This statement is correct. However, it could be even better if they talked about swash and backwash, and perhaps even using or talking about the prevailing wind being an influence, particularly on UK beaches. Longshore drift can create barrier beaches, so the candidates identified a landform, which are elongated areas of sediment which has been deposited along a bay with a lagoon behind it. Chesil Beach is an example of this. So whilst the candidate had identified a relevant example or landform, they've not identified the role of sediment in the creation of that landform. Spits are also formed via longshore drift, where sediment is deposited off a headland in the middle of the sea. So here the candidate again has talked about a relevant landform and has talked about longshore drift, but then ends the statement by saying that it ends in the middle of the sea, which is very vague. And for an A-level answer, that would demonstrate to the examiner that they have a lack of understanding of the creation of that landform. Again, in the final sentence, tombolos, correctly identified, can be formed via sediment transport, specifically longshore drift, and it's where 2 spits join together. So again, the candidate has not really talked about the role of sediment transport in the creation of tombolos, and has gone to just describe what they actually look like. Overall, for this answer, the candidate would probably get a low-level mark, maybe 2 or 3 out of 8. Next answer. Sediment transport is very important in creating distinctive landforms. Sediment is often transported by longshore drift along the beach as the waves arrive at an angle, and the backwash brings the sediment back down the beach at a 90 degrees angle. As sediment is travelled along the beach, it can create many different landforms, including spits, bars, cuspate forelands, tombolos, and bay beaches. So this candidate has talked about, very briefly in their introductory paragraph, the role of sediment, is identified longshore drift as a process, and has identified the role of swash and backwash, although doesn't talk about swash but does talk about backwash in their answer, and talks about how the material is brought onto the beach, and then qualifies that by saying that there are a number of different types of landforms that could be created. Now, if you're going to write an introduction in the exam, this would be a really good example of how to write one because the candidate has identified the role of sediment transport and then qualifies it by saying that these are the landforms that they will talk about in their answer as they go forward. Sediment is transported in a variety of ways which are determined by rock type, for example, chalk or granite, and the energy of the coastline. In low energy coastlines, the majority of sediment is transported by longshore drift, waves using backwash to remove sediment, and using swash to deposit moving across the coastline. So here the candidate has identified that rock type along coastline is influential in the creation of particular landforms, but goes on to using good keywords and processes such as low energy and longshore drift, and uses keywords like backwash to qualify or to begin to start talking about the role of sediment transport in the creation of landforms. Again, here, this is a good way to develop or start writing an answer before you get into explaining how the landforms are created because it helps to create the context in which this is being referred to. A spit is formed as sediment is further transported by longshore drift into the sea, resulting in a finger-looking landform sticking out called a recurved spit. This can help create a salt marsh behind it, providing an idyllic ecosystem for plants and other animals. So, a paragraph in itself where Canada has identified spits correctly and has talked about the process that is helps you create it, and then develops it and then says that this then creates another feature called a recurve spit, and then goes on to qualify that here's another example of another landform that's created as a result of that one. So this is a very good development of a key point of how a landform is created, assuming that the candidate has previously talked about the role of sediment transport in the creation of these particular landforms themselves. A bar is a landform created where a spit is formed directly across a bay connecting both sides, which traps a lagoon behind it. Furthermore, a cusped foreland is a triangular-shaped landform that juts out to sea. It is believed that these formed due to two spits joined together as opposing longshore drift brought sediment from two sides of the coast. So again, um, the candidate has talked about relevant landforms. And again, if the candidate had just written this paragraph on its own, then it wouldn't be sufficient because the candidate has not talked about sediment transport. However, your assumption should be that they have talked about it before, and therefore this would be a perfectly valid and a well-developed paragraph in itself. So explain the role of sediment transport in creating distinct landforms. It's a pretty straightforward question as long as you understand the landforms involved and you know what the processes are. And the only way that you're going to do that is by making sure that you revise those particular key points. Go back to the beginning of this video and look at the table, maybe make your own notes. You can do it on your computer or you can write it out by hand, whichever you prefer. Of course, if you're going to be typing the exam, then I would suggest you type. But if you're writing the exam, then make sure you do it by hand. And then write your answer. It should take you maybe about 20 minutes or so. But doing the exam question itself will be really good practice for you because it will help you to think about how to structure your paragraphs. Maybe start with an introduction where you identify specific sediment transport features and then talk about the landforms that created from them. And then the following two or three paragraphs, you talk about a particular landform and how and why it's created. So make sure that you've gone back and done the other exam questions that are on here. There are lots and lots of exam questions out there, but the more that you do in the run up to your exams, which are only a few weeks away now, this will be really good practice for you. Please do not spend time reading your textbook. Please make sure that you do lots of exam questions. The better or more confident you get with writing them, even if you are making some notes before you start answering the question, will be far more beneficial than you sitting down and just reading your textbook, which is the worst form of revision that you can do. So, if there are any questions, then let me know in the chat now. And if not, then we will crack on next week. Okay, you're welcome.